Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thank you so much for downloading the Faith Life podcast of Discovery Fellowship Church. I'm your host, Pastor Nathan, here with my co-host, Pastor Matt.
What's up, guys?
And today, we look like we're in a cult. If you're watching on the video, we're both wearing these purple shirts, and you can't see much else. But it's actually our VBS shirts that we have put on as we're filming some VBS promotional content today. So our VBS is coming up. Matt, are you excited?
Yeah, I'm so excited. Vacation Bible School, for those of you that don't know what VBS means, if you're listening to this. Super excited. We'll have, our goal is over 100 kids from our community, which is huge because like a Sunday morning, typically we're of that elementary age group between like 15 and 20.
Yeah.
So to do that big of an increase is huge. And so we're excited to share the gospel with them, give them a fun week, relationship building. It's going to be awesome. And
today we're going to make a video of Pastor Matt on a skateboard, maybe at a skate park, doing something crazy, maybe breaking his collarbone. Did I ever...
Hold up, I can't break my collarbone because I leave on Monday to fly to California to help my mom who just had back surgery.
So we got to be very careful.
If I'm incapable of helping her, then I fly there and my dad has to then take the week off work.
Oh, that's not good.
Because I can't lift anything and she can't lift anything.
When I was younger, me and my cousin were out riding bikes and we saw this long drop and there looked like a jump type thing at the end. And he was like, "Do you think I could make that?" I was like, "Oh yeah, totally. You got this, kid."
Knowing that he wouldn't make it.
I'm not psychic, but it seemed like maybe not. And so he went on it and he just went flying off and broke his collarbone.
Oh,
it was sad. Let's jump into our news segment today. This is going around a couple different sources. I thought this was interesting. The headline is this: Southern Baptists lost nearly 500,000 members last year. Now, Southern Baptist, we are technically a Southern Baptist church here at Discovery, although you wouldn't know it unless you knew it. And they are still the biggest single denomination in the U.S.
Even after losing 500,000?
Yes, but there's a little bit less than that. I don't remember what the second one is. Okay. But the reasons that... Or what happened was, so you've got people just leaving entirely.
Right.
But then it was something like 400 churches that were Southern Baptist closed as well. And so you've had a lot of churches closing. You've had a lot of churches leaving the denomination. Right. And then you've had just people leaving the denomination as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting is that from what I've been able to read, it's almost like both sides of the spectrum, you have people upset with them. Right. So it's on the one hand, they're too left-leaning, right? Quote unquote. Or I've heard people say they're too woke in certain areas of what they've been saying. And so that makes them want to leave. And then other places are they're not, so they're either too liberal or they're too conservative. And so it's we need to leave them because they don't allow female pastors.
Right. So the whole Saddleback thing.
The whole Saddleback
thing. Where they
thing.
ordain their female youth pastor.
Right.
And then from what I remember hearing with that is, so I think they're now under investigation by the Southern Baptist Convention saying you're no longer friendly with our practices or beliefs or whatever.
Right.
And so hundreds of churches have actually reached out to Saddleback, who also have women in pastoral leadership, not necessarily as main teaching pastor, but as a pastor on staff in whatever capacity, whether it's women's pastor, children's pastor, youth pastor, whatever it might be, in support of Saddleback, but also fearing that they're also going to
lose their connection
with the denomination as well. So it's kind of maybe this is a good thing ultimately of, let's clarify what really matters, what makes a denomination who they are. Okay. And are some churches just a part of that denomination because it was convenient and easy when they first started, and realizing that, hey, I don't necessarily actually line up with that. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thought.
It's definitely is. And then there was, of course, there was kind of a more scandalous thing with regards to some of their sexual harassments and the way that they
under the rug type
brushing
of thing,
things under the rug, or they were basically asked if they could create a database so that it would make it harder for people who were found guilty of that to then just go find another church somewhere and immediately be like plugged in as another Southern Baptist. Like Southern Baptist Church is not as like organized as like the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. Whereas where they would actually like somebody was accused of this and probably guilty, and they would just move that priest and say, you're assigned here now, right? They have that hierarchy in the Catholic Church, whereas we don't have that. But there were still people who would be able to be like, oh yeah, I've already been ordained as a Southern Baptist pastor. It makes it easier to move into another church. And so there had been requests to say, can you create like a database so that it'd be easy for people to find out before they hire you? And they're like, no, that's impossible. And then it came out that they did have that database already made.
They just didn't share it.
And they just didn't share it with people or
something
like that. So
don't you do a background check on anyone that you hire? And wouldn't like a convicted sexual felon?
That's where it is. If you weren't convicted of it, if you were just kind of accused of it, and so you left and nobody like filed anything.
I see. So this is more create a database that allows me to see what type of baggage might they be bringing with them.
Right.
Even though they weren't. See, but that's almost
it's a little strange, right?
Yeah, because that's like guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation of whether or not innocent until proven guilty is good or bad. I've heard arguments on both sides, and it's kind of interesting to hear the reasoning. But yeah, it's so easy for someone to make an accusation when they're angry.
Right.
And so in those situations, does that then ruin that person's ability to pursue his calling? You know, like I don't know.
It's definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah.
And it kind of is going to lead us into our main topic for today.
Okay.
And what we're going to talk about now, I think we've talked about we've talked about tangential pieces of this here or there, but I think we want to talk a little bit about church attendance in general. Like we see a decline in church attendance in our country. In America, we've seen that over the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. We saw COVID obviously accelerated it, but I think that we're at a point where we can say it's, instead of just saying, well, we can blame everything on COVID, we could say that COVID maybe exposed some things that were already happening and maybe made things happen a little bit faster. But I don't think that's the underlying root of it, right? COVID is almost a symptom.
Yeah. In 2019, I was reading some stats earlier when we were talking about this. In 2019, 4,500 Protestant churches closed with only 3,000 opening.
Okay,
so a loss of 1,500 churches. So not necessarily church attendance, but churches in general. Even pre-COVID, we were seeing in the Protestant community great losses.
Yeah. So. And I know that statistically speaking, the average size of a church in America at this point is like 50 people. So if you are, and it was higher, it was closer to 100.
Yeah.
But now it's down to like 50 or 60. So if you are at a church of 50 or 60, that is the average church size now. The other thing that as I was looking up some of this data, it's like, well, what is like church attendance look like, right? And so this is from Church Track. They pull data from a bunch of other sources as well. And this was from Gallup, the number of Americans who attend church every week. So if you go every single Sunday, if you answered a Gallup poll saying I go to church every week, 20%. So 20% of Americans
of Americans or of self-proclaimed Christians.
This says of Americans.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a higher number than I think I would have guessed.
Okay. Now this says, I mean, we can pull up the actual Gallup. Now, the other thing is that it says that's what in 2000 was 32%. So in 20 years, we've dropped 12% on that, right? And then, if you raise the bar a little bit to say you go at least once a month or more, you get to 41%.
But of Americans.
It says of Americans. Now, this is interesting. 57% of Americans are seldom or never in religious service attendance.
Okay.
So over half.
So these numbers are religious service, not Christian?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Those numbers make sense then to me.
Well, it says attend church, so I don't know if you were to say...
So that's Mormon, Catholic, Protestant, like evangelical, all those categories.
Yeah.
Does it then... Would that include like mosque or... It's hard.
So
hard to say.
I'm pulling up the actual Gallup poll right now.
Okay.
And so this says, all right, what is your religious preference? Are you Protestant, Roman, Catholic, Mormon, Jewish, Muslim, or another religion?
Okay.
Or none? And they've got that as, one of their stats they look at. Now, that's interesting. The Protestant number in 2022 said 34%.
Okay.
Said Protestant. If I go back to 1948, 69%. 1955, 70% would have answered Protestant.
Wow.
So we have dropped to 34%. Now, is that just because as population has skyrocketed and we have different people coming in,
right?
The percentage shrinks because the country has grown so much and you've got people from other groups coming in more.
Right. So what was those numbers you were just reading? That was church or identifying as religious?
The one I just read was identifying what religion. Now I'm looking. Did you happen to attend church or synagogue in the last 7 days or not? 30% said yes. Okay. 70% said no. How often do you attend church or synagogue? Every week, almost every week, or about once a month, seldom or never. So 2022, 20% said every week.
And this is a Gallup poll?
This is Gallup, and so it was across all religions.
Okay, so I have a Pew Research article up. Now this is from December 14th of 2021 is when they released this information. So this was a year and a half ago. But it says self-identified Christians make up 63% of the U.S. population in 2021.
Okay.
Versus 75% a decade ago. I mean, still trending downward, but
not as poorly.
Well,
self-identifying Christians, now my number is just at Protestant. So if we put in Catholic, if we put in non-specified Christian, and if we put in maybe even like Mormons would say self-identify as that, right?
Many at least would.
All right. So we do see it, regardless of how we look at it,
trending downward.
We are seeing this downward trend
pretty significantly when you look at like number of people that represents.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, it's only a 12% drop or whatever number it might be.
It's a lot of people.
But 12% of 330 million.
Right.
In the U.S., that's a lot of people.
Okay. So, and I think this bit on the Gallup poll also is interested about that. So they asked this, of the people with no religious preference, they asked them, how interested are you in exploring religion in the future?
Okay.
Very interested, moderately interested, a little interested, or not interested at all.
Okay. All
right. So this was asked of people who are not religiously affiliated. 4% said very interested. 6% said moderately interested. 14% said a little interested. 77% said not interested at all.
Mm-hmm.
So people who have no religious affiliation are not interested in pursuing that at all by a lot. And then people are leaving the church as well.
Yeah.
So what's happening? Why is this happening? And let's start with that, Matt. What do you think? Why is this happening?
I think... Man, there's so much that it's a big question, and there's probably a lot of reasons. And I think if you ask 100 people, you might get 100 answers here.
Yeah.
And so what then are some common themes or trends? I think one of them, at least that I've seen, is the voice of like the extreme is louder due to the internet and social media. And so you have people who claim to be Christians who are like spewing hate online, right?
Right.
And so as a non-religious person, if I'm seeing that, I'm now associating religious people with hate, and I want nothing to do with that.
Okay.
Even though like that person does not represent me as a
Right.
Christian. And I would hope that the non-Christians I interact with don't see that from me.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. I wonder how much also is like the affluence of America, and we're so comfortable that we don't feel like we have the need for an outside power, so to speak, right? It's, I can do everything on my own. I have everything I need. I don't need God. I don't need religion. I don't need someone to save me. I can do it myself, if that's part of it at all. Now, this is answering that question of why do those non-religious people not want?
Why are they not interested?
Yeah, right. Why are they not interested?
Now, this is the next piece of data that I find really fascinating because this goes against what I would have imagined. So when we think about like who's attending church, at least I would think you and I would probably think, and maybe you listening at home, it seems like it's like the older generations are the ones who are really attending, and each generation is just falling off successively less and less. But right now, millennials are actually at a higher percentage than both Gen X and boomers.
Really?
Millennials, 39% of millennials report attending church on a weekly basis, according to a Barna report. Significant increase over years prior places them at a much higher rate than Gen X and even the boomer generations, which previously had been more faithfully attendants than their younger counterparts. So if we look at this, and this is only over, this chart's over a few years, but what you see in 2019, boomers were the highest attended.
Okay.
Followed by Gen X, followed by millennials at like close to 20% was where the millennials were. 2020, boomers increased. Actually, every group went up in 2020 of those three age categories. And then 2021, massive plummet.
Wait, hang on a second. Church attendance went up in 2020?
The people who reported attending on a weekly basis
went up
in 2020.
In 2020.
Now,
when churches weren't meeting and taking weeks off,
people
or
saying
converting.
They went, yeah. But in 2021, it plummeted.
Right.
And
so here's my initial thought on this.
Okay.
We had a few people at our church who weren't coming for a while.
Right.
COVID hit, and we moved to being able to produce everything online.
Yep.
And they said, hey, we've been watching every week.
Right.
So they're counting it as attending.
Right.
But then like that novelty maybe by
wore
2021 wore off. I'm like, well, it was convenient to just sleep in.
Right.
Or we got busy again because we started all of our activities came back up.
Right. So then
That's
2021,
really
so boomers were still the top group of weekly attendance in 2021, but now millennials were the second highest and Gen X fell off. And now 2022, it goes way back up again. But in this instance, millennials are significantly higher, Gen X above that, and then boomers at the bottom.
Now, aren't millennials the ones that we even talked about that age group when we talked about the deconstruction movement, right?
You feel like it's always the millennials who are doing that. But it looks like they were actually leading the going to church once a week now, millennials, whereas boomers are at the bottom now and not coming back to church. Now, here's some key statistics. So 39% of millennials report attending church weekly, up from 21% in 2019. So you've almost doubled in 2-3 years.
Wow.
The percentage of millennials. Non-white millennials drive the increase in church attendance. 45% of non-white millennials are attending church weekly compared to 35% of white millennials.
Okay.
So not to get into like a racial component too much, because there's maybe not a lot we can speak to about that. And honestly, we don't want to necessarily boil everything back down to race.
Right.
But we are seeing the country become a more racially diverse place, even in the past 50 years, to an extent that we hadn't before. And so as that happens, what effects does that have on church attendance? Well, apparently millennials, that's driving the increase. Now, the next question that this survey asks is, well, why are millennials leaving the church, even though a higher percentage of them are coming?
Okay.
Now, this says many millennials never had strong ties to religion in the first place. My generation was not, so whoever wrote this was apparently a millennial.
Yeah.
Was not brought up in the church in the same numbers as generations prior, leaving us without much connection to the church as we entered adulthood. So let's stop right there, because I'm going to go on to some of this next stuff, and I think it's fascinating. But leaving us without much connection to the church as we entered adulthood.
Yeah.
Now, even beyond millennials, let's talk about Gen Z real quick. Let's talk about Gen Alpha, stuff like that. It does seem, and I don't have Gen Z numbers on this report right now, but it does seem that we have people who are raised in the church somewhat or a little bit, but they don't connect in a way, and so they don't stick around. As soon as you hit college, you hit that big drop. And we've talked about this in the past. Why is it that those super younger demographics don't want to come back or don't want to stay plugged in as soon as they're able to leave?
Right. And maybe that, that statement from your thing about they felt like they did not have that connection.
Okay.
We're still getting that because for many years, and we've talked about this, you had the like separation of adult and youth, right? So everyone treated like youth and kids as like the second class citizens at church. So it's you guys go over to your own building, your own room, your own whatever, do your own thing, stay quiet, stay out of my church service type of thing.
Right.
And when they did show up, they got dirty looks from older generations type of stuff.
That's why it's so important to integrate your services. And we have talked about that.
Super important.
On this podcast.
And so I'm wondering if that's part of it. Cause then like, they don't know what that multi-generational church looks like when they graduate and they leave home. They're no longer going because mom and dad say go to church. And so if they don't have that foundation and connection already, they might not desire to pursue that. And potentially this brings up another question for a future podcast. I know we've talked about the importance of church in the past, but you know, does church attendance affect like whether or not I'm an actual Christian type of thing, right?
Okay,
Because I wonder how many of those...
Can I be a Christian and not go to church?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Let's bring that'll be a good one.
Yeah. So I wonder if that's like part of this at all of like, I still love Jesus. I just don't love his people.
Right.
Or I don't like his people.
Well, and that kind of gets into this next section. It says millennials are reportedly turned off by high-profile church leadership scandals and the increasing political polarization in many American congregations, causing many to lose trust in churches and religious institutions altogether. I saw a video on TikTok. A guy was a pastor of this church, and he said, if you're a Democrat, don't even bother coming in. I don't want you here. And I saw a guy who was responding to that, and he said, well, hopefully we can all agree this is a terrible thing to say. This is obviously false. And then he was pointing out, and I thought this was hilarious. He said, as soon as you start building your church around anything other than Jesus, you're going to have a problem. Yeah. Like this guy has built it around political parties, political affiliation, and that's what his church is. And so he said the irony of this whole thing is that while he is a super conservative pastor, he's actually falling into very theologically liberal beliefs.
Right.
Because he is moving his church to not be about Jesus as much as it is about politics. Yeah. And so I thought that was funny.
He's becoming the very thing he claims to like.
Right. And so with this millennial group, so again, we saw 39% of millennials report attendance weekly, but 40% of millennials are religiously unaffiliated. So just as many as that are attending weekly have no religious affiliation at all. So again, we're seeing kind of the splitting into both directions. That it's interesting, right?
I do. Yeah. So millennials, real quick, they are, if you go with like the broadest age range, it's 81 to 96. And I know that there's like this micro generation that's been labeled Zennials. They're kind of like that 77 to 83 era. The Star Wars years is what like I refer to them as, where they like dabble in a little bit of both millennial and Gen X thought process and attitudes and however you define generations. I don't really know. But like with this element of, so those people, getting back to that, their ages right now, family, career, right? Like they're married, they're starting to have kids, they're established in their workforce. And so are they starting to come back to church?
That's an interesting
idea. So maybe they left after high school because they were part of that generation where youth group was always separated from church. Right. Kind of that big blow up during the youth specialties era. Mike Yaconelli, who started that. And we talked about that when we talked about the history and the future of youth ministry. Go back and listen to that podcast.
Just go back and check that one out. It was fascinating.
Like, you know, so a lot of that age range left, but now like, oh, I have a family, you know, I'm starting to remember, oh man, like, God is important and a meaningful part of my life, and I want to raise my kids this way, especially as we look at where our world is going. Hell in a handbasket, as like grandma would say, right? Sure. And so, sorry if that offended anybody. But yeah, so you go, now they're like, okay, I'm bringing my family back to church. Right. So like they're starting to lead their family instead of just focused on my own personal preferences. So is that why we're seeing millennial attendance increase a little bit?
Okay. So now let me give you another piece of data, and maybe this will help answer some of your questions. All right. So which churches are losing the most members? Okay. So for decades, it says mainline Protestant denominations were losing members at an alarming rate, while the conservative evangelical traditions grew. For instance, between 2000 and 2015, the Presbyterian Church, the Episcopal Church, and the United Church of Christ, both what it calls mainline, we would say theologically liberal, probably,
right.
Lost 40% of their members. In contrast, Protestant evangelical churches and denominations saw a slight increase in church membership during that first decade of the century, so 20 to 2015. However, that is no longer the case. Reporting of church attendance by denominations and traditions of all stripes show the lowest attendance rates that's never before been seen in America's history, including the conservative evangelical churches. Okay. Interestingly, non-denominational churches are what have seen the most growth in recent years. Yeah. The U.S. Religion Census found an additional 6,000 non-denominational churches in North America since 2010 and 6.5 million more people in religious attendance. Okay. So if people are leaving denominations and heading to these non-denominationals, does that give us, do you think, a clue about what is causing it? Because I don't know. I find that interesting, though.
Yeah. So non-denominational churches, a lot of your mega churches are non-denominational.
Right.
Now, I don't want to put all mega churches on blast here.
Okay.
But maybe I will a little bit.
Sure.
Are you a mega church because you're preaching Jesus and sin and the need for repentance and forgiveness of those sins? Or are you mega church because you're like tickling the ears of people who are coming?
Right.
You're providing, because you have so many people coming, you have a great source of income. And so you're able to produce great programs where my family has fun coming to your church. I'm not growing in my faith at all, but I'm checking a box of I did church attendance. Like, is that part of it? So I actually, I was reading an article earlier. I don't know if it was today or not, but it was someone went and listened to 36 sermons from the top 36 churches. He just listened to the sermons online.
Okay.
And found that 36 of those 36 sermons did not preach Jesus, sin, repentance type of thing. Jesus might have been mentioned in it, right, but it was super light. And so is that part of that growth on that end where it's because I'm not calling, pastors aren't calling out sin or, actually preaching the Bible. They're just kind of preaching what is going to make you feel good in that movie. The sermon series where you have at the movies. And you're playing a 30-minute clip of a movie and then
5 minutes
a 5-minute devotion.
Spiritual, a little bit of a feel-good minute.
Right.
But I think another thing that kind of jumped out at me when we look at that is if there's a bigger concern over scandals and abuses and political division, a lot of times you associate that with these larger hierarchical organizations, whereas maybe you view a non-denominational church as kind of separate from that. Like they're not a part of this institution. They're just, and I think maybe that it's kind of this push towards a feeling of New Testament churches where they just met in people's houses and it was like a small community and it wasn't a part of this bigger group in a way, that wasn't this hierarchical institution, but just people meeting who love Jesus. And so I think for people who have seen, like you talk about it, we've talked about some of the craziness of the 90s church,
right?
And how there's so much non-Jesus being added in to it that a lot of, that's our age group, that's the millennial group, right? Yeah. That we see that we're like, we don't want that. We just want Jesus, like kind of what you were saying before. And so I think seeing there's an appeal to something non-denominational that can, at least on the surface, make it feel like, well, that just is about Jesus. Yeah. It doesn't have all this other baggage that I associate with an institution.
Right. That's fair. And going back to that quote you had from the millennials of they're sick of or, discouraged by the fallout of pastors from scandals, and the political nature of church. Me too.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
I agree with all that. It's just like, so we just have said, instead of giving church up, let's just try to point the church back to where it was supposed to.
Get back to Jesus.
Right. And I feel like this is the history of the church. Like the church, since Jesus was here, has gotten off track. And then we have to turn around and say, well, can we bring it back? Can we refocus it? Can we try to make it about what it was supposed to be about?
Right.
Kind of get, reformation, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So going back into some of these statistics, let's kind of keep plugging through these because I think it's interesting. Now, this is from Barna. 16% of Christians who regularly attended church before COVID no longer attended at all. So COVID killed about 16% of, not killed was maybe the wrong word to use there, attendance, dropped in attendance. Yeah. Surprisingly, boomers had the highest drop-off rate, with 22% self-reporting as no longer attending church services either in person or online.
Okay, so boomers are born between 46 and 64. So they're in their late 60s, early 70s right now, right?
Right.
So of that 16%, I'd be interested, and again, this is like an individual conversation with each person. So, hey, church leaders, when people leave, follow up.
Right.
Find out what's actually happening. So are these people, is it, well, I'm scared for my health. Right. To go and be in person with everybody.
But this included online. And so maybe.
And I don't know how to do online, or that feels weird to me. So they just stopped.
That's interesting. Yeah, this would be an interesting thing to get a little bit more of the direct data.
Did they stop reading their Bible? Did they stop, whatever it might be?
Right.
Or did they just stop the church attendance?
Right.
I want to know these things. We would have to get a little bit more clarity.
Right.
Because we had issues, Nathan, when we first moved to online.
Yeah.
Several of our boomer friends were struggling to figure out how to connect with us.
Right.
And so there were actually a few times where we actually had to go to their houses help them.
That is true.
And literally show like a step-by-step, click-by-click. They wrote it all down to figure out what they do every Sunday morning. And there's several at our church of that age range and even older who we haven't seen back since.
Right.
But they still feel like they're able to connect a little bit because of online stuff.
Right.
We have one who every week is online watching and comments and says good morning to us. And we've been able to visit a couple times or talk to a couple times. And there's been a few times where she's had struggles, but I'd be really interested to know, did I just stop church attendance or did I stop did I abandon in my faith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look forward to the future then. Let's look ahead. We've been talking a lot about millennials and boomers. Let's look at Gen Z.
Okay.
Because I think what we'd have to, but beyond anything, you have to be looking at the next generations, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not going to have a church.
Right.
Right. If your church, this is what's crazy is if the boomer generation is dropping off, pretty soon the millennial generation is going to be that older generation.
Right.
And if the Gen Z and beyond is just not interested, then you're going to see these numbers get much worse, not better.
Right.
So,
because as we die, the church dies with us if we're not reaching the next generation.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a marketing study in 2018. So this is pre-COVID. Okay. I don't know if COVID has changed any of these things, but asking Gen Z, non-church going Gen Z. So this was people who are non-religiously affiliated. The two biggest things that they were looking for is this: faith practices that are immediately relevant to their daily life.
Okay.
And faith practices that make a positive impact on the world around them.
Okay. So if faith practices for me, faith practices
things
for outreach.
Right.
Okay.
Young people are looking for a connection to a faith and a community that will help give them direction while also making a difference in the world. They're interested in addressing more than just basic theology and religious beliefs, but topics that have immediate relevance in their lives. These topics include mental health, questions and doubts about God, identity and purpose, social justice, environmental issues, and many more. Okay. They went into a little bit further detail. 77% of non-church going members of Gen Z are looking for churches that help the poor. 72% of non-church going members of Gen Z have doubts about the existence of God. 73% of non-church-going members of Gen Z are looking for churches that address mental health, and 69% of non-church-going members of Gen Z are looking for churches that provide opportunities to help others.
So you have this movement in a lot of churches of what they call a social justice gospel, right? Where my focus as a Christian is just that, like the focus on the mental health and the poor and the needy and the marginalized, all good things, all biblical things, but often done at the expense of the whole gospel of Jesus.
Right. It's right. And I think what we've seen is, as often tends to happen, is people sliding into the two extremes, right? So it's either that's all that your church preaches, or because you don't want to do that, you don't preach any of it.
Right. It's all Jesus and no justice, or all justice and no Jesus type of thing. Yeah.
And it's like, we need to be able to preach both. And
the
it's
whole picture.
The whole picture. Gospel, and I think it's like, again, it's because of this increasing conflation between like faith and politics, right? Because what we can say is, well, I am a politically conservative person A, let's say, and they would say, because of that, I have these principles that say the government shouldn't be worried about A, B, and C, like helping the poor in this way, or like, that's not the government's job.
Yeah.
But then we do see, as a Christian, as a person, as a follower of Jesus, you are called to do those things, right? And so because you don't want the government to do it, we can then sometimes go too far in that direction and say, so then we don't want to even talk about that, because it sounds like then we're endorsing, because again, in our minds, we've conflated politics and religion, that if I talk about helping people who are mistreated, if I talk about justice, there's so much political baggage, and because it's so intertwined, now what we're saying is that I can't even talk about these issues, because if I'm a conservative, now I'm going to be considered the worst thing ever. I might be called a Democrat. That's the biggest insult I can have somebody, because again, maybe I'm not trying to make a political statement, right? We're just talking about as a church, how do we help people? Yeah. And I think that's the biblical answer. As a church, we should be helping people. And like we look at Discovery, we have our Shine Pantry that we provide food to people who need it every month, right? That's one of the things that we do. And so again, I think a lot of this problem stems from these conflation of politics and Christianity. It's interesting.
Agreed. It's funny because there's people who say you can't talk about that, then have to ignore a few like key passages in Scripture and really like themes throughout the entirety of it, right? But you think of, the one that we frequently go to, Micah 6:8. Right. He's shown you, immortal, what is good for you. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with the Lord. So act justly and loving mercy, both things that require me to think outside of myself and my own little church attendance. And then you have in James 1:27, it says, religion that's pure and undefiled before God is this: visit orphans and widows in their affliction, to keep oneself unstained from the world. So again, there's a visiting those who are in need and potentially marginalized in our world. This is really interesting that we, I guess it's been the history of humanity, right? We ignore certain parts of Scripture that doesn't fit into my own personal narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And emphasize other areas of Scripture that do focus on what I want my life to look like. And so, and that's where you get prosperity gospel from is I take the verses that make me feel good about this and push this specific agenda, and I ignore the rest.
Right. All right. I'm going to give you one more piece of data as we kind of bring this conversation to close. And then I want us to talk about like, what do we do? Like as a local church, what's next? So which types of congregations are experiencing the biggest growth right now? Charismatic and Pentecostal are experiencing more growth than anybody else right now. Now, why do you think that is?
I don't know.
I think the more charismatic Pentecostal movements do provide that thing that Gen Z was looking for, in a sense of maybe a little bit of, it seems more authentic or immediately applicable because you are so charismatic. You're so kind of over the top and excited and happy to be there. It's like, well, if you walk into that service and people are like dancing in the aisles, people are excited and they're saying, look what Jesus has done in my life. That's kind of what we see in like the quote unquote Pentecostal church. Yeah. And then you walk into like a Baptist church and everybody looks like they're dead. They look like they don't want to be there. It's very stuffy and a sermon goes on, but it doesn't give them anything to actually do with, right? I've learned a little bit about the Bible, but I don't know what to do with that. I was given a big steak and I don't know, I don't have even my teeth in yet. Like I'm a baby still, right? I don't know what to do with this. Well, which church are you going to want to go to?
Right.
You're going to want to go to the one that seems to be alive.
Yeah.
So
how do we fix that?
What do we do about this? Like as a local church, we don't obviously want to look at this and change our theology. Right. We don't want to look at this and be like, well, okay, we're all going to start speaking a private prayer language and tongue babbling in the sanctuary. Because charismatic churches, they're doing something right, so let's copy them.
Right.
So what do we do?
Yeah. I think, and again, Nathan, you and I have talked about this, especially as it relates to our youth. We move from a program-based model of ministry to a discipleship-based model of ministry. I think that's a huge element. So I feel like a lot of those churches you see in decline, they're going to be the ones who are focused on all the programs that we've been running for 20 years and doing it the same way that we've always been doing it. And the more programs I can get going, the better my church is going to be and the more we're going to grow.
Right.
Our world is over-programmed as it is. Right. Everyone is so busy. There's so much going on in their life. They don't need more meetings to attend and more programs to go to. I've said this in youth ministry for years. I can't out-entertain the world. Right. So why do I even try? Like, I don't need to be the Disneyland of Fort Collins.
Right.
I don't have that budget.
Few do.
Or time. But what I can do that the world can't provide is point them to Jesus. Give them this like discipleship, growth in Christ type of programming, for lack of a better word, but like it's less about that program and more about the person then. Right. And how are you growing? How can I encourage you and love you and point you to Jesus more? And so it's a focus on the person. Okay. Right. So I think that's important because again, you go into a dead church on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
No one cares about the person next to them. It's let's just check off this program list.
Right.
Get through this worship service so I can then go back to my busy life.
Right.
And I never feel seen or loved or valued as a person when Jesus was really good at seeing and loving and valuing the individual.
Right.
So that's the first thing I think of.
Okay.
Second thing I think of is get the heck out of your building.
Okay.
Right. Like stop. Again, it kind of goes back to that program, but we're so focused in these churches that are dying because it's all about getting people in the pews on Sunday morning.
Okay.
So that we can say, hey, look at our attendance.
Right.
Come to us. Come be a part of this church. And instead of us going out and saying, how can I love and serve my community?
Okay.
Right. And so I think, again, going back to some of the things you read about what Gen Z is looking for.
Right.
That outward. So what's for me, like, right, that's part of it. So that's me focusing on the person. But then what is the church doing for others? And I think a lot of the dying churches don't do any sort of outreach or community involvement. They're not known in their community as a church who values them and loves them.
Right.
That's why I've seen, I really like and again, maybe the churches have some other issues, but the churches who like push this movement of like for Fort Collins, right? Okay. Or we're for Northern Colorado.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm constantly reminded as a church member at Discovery Fellowship Church that it's not about me and my preferences for church, but it's about my community that I'm a part of and how I can show them the love of Jesus and point them to Christ. So I'm for Fort Collins or Northern Colorado.
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
I've seen for Atlanta, when I've gone to conferences there, several churches like have actually partnered together. What is that even allowed?
Crazy
for my city type of thing. And it's this huge, awesome movement. They're working together, do huge community outreach stuff. And honestly, when you take our Shine ministry is awesome, but a very limited budget.
Right.
Imagine if we were able to take that and combine it with 10 other churches.
Right.
Now, how many people can we reach? Right. And so like, again, we got to start thinking outside of ourselves, outside of well, this is how I've always done church, so I have to continue it, and it's all about me and my preferences. No, it's not.
Right. It's not our church.
No, it's his church.
Jesus' church.
And pretty sure scripture says that he wishes that none would perish.
Right.
And he calls us to be the hands and feet, the light of the world.
Yeah.
So if I don't care about those who are perishing, I'm speaking eternally, not like physically right now, right? Like their spiritual side.
Right.
If I don't care about them and go out and love them and serve them and point them to Jesus,
what am I doing?
Do I honestly love Jesus?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's
a harsh question, but maybe one that needs to be
something we have
asked.
to do some self-evaluation, both as an individual and as a church. And so maybe there's like the first two things that come to mind is focus on the person and discipleship rather than programs. And then as a result of that, we're getting outside of our building because we're less focused on what we do in here and more focused on those who don't yet know Jesus.
I love that.
And pointing them towards him. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let us know what you think about that. Email podcast@dfchurch.com and you can be a part of the conversation. And while you're on your computer sending us that email, take a minute, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you downloaded this podcast. Now, we're going to move on real quick into our AI segment. I love this part of the day. We don't have any listener or viewer mail this week. So again, take a minute. Email podcast@dfchurch.com. Even if you don't have a question or comment, just email me and let me know you heard this.
Yeah. And share our podcast with your friends.
Yeah, share it with somebody. That'd be fun too. And especially now that's on YouTube, it's really easy.
Yep.
All right. So here's what I asked the AI for this week.
Okay.
What are 10 creative ways that biblical characters could have used modern technology if it existed in their time?
Interesting. Okay.
This first one, we're playing a little bit fast and loose with the idea of modern technology.
Got it.
Number 10, Jesus' miracle teleportation device. Do we have teleportation devices?
Future technology?
Picture Jesus using a device that allows him to instantly teleport from one location to another, making his ministry even more efficient and awe-inspiring. I mean, yeah, that would be cool.
Hot take right here. Ready?
Yeah.
Pretty sure Jesus could have done that if he wanted to.
Right, but he didn't have a device. He didn't have
we need the device.
He needs the teleportation.
He is the device, right? Okay, that is kind of fun.
Okay.
But again, not modern technology.
Okay, this one is, but I don't understand it. Number 9, Daniel's Lion's Den security system. Visualize, instead of picture. Visualize Daniel setting up state-of-the-art security system around the Lion's Den, complete with motion sensors and cameras. I don't know what benefit that would have done for Daniel.
Right. Let him know, like, hey, someone's coming to the den where I'm trapped.
Right.
Because these aren't in the den, right? It's around the den.
It says around the Lion's Den.
Okay.
Should I ask it to explain number 9?
Yeah,
ask a little more. Like, I don't understand what that means. And it did not pick the right one.
Okay.
What the crud? Okay.
We'll move on.
Well, we're gonna move on because I said explain number 9 and it explained number 8.
Perfect.
Which is this Joseph's dream interpretation app.
Oh,
okay. Now they do have these.
All right.
Imagine Joseph using an app that analyzes dreams and provides instant interpretations, saving him the trouble of relying on his gift. You don't need to use the gift God's given you. There's an app for that.
I feel like you should have just cut out that last sentence, AI. I mean, this is what ChatGPT is, right? I can type into it, hey, I had a dream last night. Tell me what you think it means.
Right.
Sweet. All right, so this is legit.
Okay, I like it. Number 7, Job's video conference support group.
Oh, maybe it would have been better than his friends.
Envision Job participating in a video conference support group to connect with others who have faced similar trials.
Oh, no.
So it's like, hey, has
anyone lost everything?
Has Satan made a bet with God for you too?
Yeah.
Type thing?
Oh, wow.
I like this next one a lot.
Thanks, Zoom.
Samson's super strength fitness tracker. Picture Samson wearing a fitness tracker that monitors his strength levels and provides real-time data on his power.
I love that.
Dude, it's Samson with a Fitbit.
Yeah, Samson with a Fitbit. Oh, man.
See, that one's fun. That makes really...
How many steps did he get a day?
Exactly. Or, how's his heart health? It's checking.
Yeah, what if, like, Jesus had a Fitbit? That would have been fun to just see.
Everybody had a Fitbit.
Everyone had a Fitbit. You can track
way
it.
Off the charts.
Yeah, love it.
Number 5, Solomon's virtual reality wisdom simulator.
Solomon's virtual reality wisdom simulator.
Imagine Solomon using a virtual reality headset to experience various scenarios and gain wisdom through simulated situations.
Well, he didn't need to gain wisdom. He was already granted it by
through
God.
VR.
Oh, all right. I was thinking, so when you first read it, my initial thought was instead of people having to come to him,
right, he could
you would just log into this VR session.
And you're with VR Solomon.
You're with VR Solomon.
See, that's cool.
Where he can help you solve your problems because of his great wisdom.
Okay.
Yeah. Or like he uploads his consciousness into that VR system. So like he could be himself in person. He doesn't have to always be in these virtual meetings. Anyway, continue.
Number 4, Jonah's submarine.
Well, that would have been nice instead of a great.
Well, it says, envision Jonah being swallowed by a miniaturized submarine.
Wait, what?
That allows him to explore the belly of the great fish.
So the submarine swallows him, and then the fish swallows the submarine, and then he's able to.
I've never heard of a person being swallowed by a submarine, and it says miniaturized. So does he get shrunken down and he's tiny?
Oh.
And he gets to explore the fish.
It's like the magic school bus. Oh, that's
the magic
fun.
submarine.
Right, the magic
submarine.
submarine.
See, that's kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
Number 3, I like this one a lot. Noah's Ark drone. Visualize Noah using a drone to survey the flood and capture aerial footage of the ark and animals.
There we go.
That would have been awesome.
Well, and then you don't need to send the doves out.
Right. You could just check out send the drone.
Anything? Nope. Okay.
Number 2, David's slingshot app. Picture David using a smartphone app that calculates the optimal trajectory for his slingshot shots against Goliath.
Okay.
I don't know. Do they have an app that lets you calculate trajectory of optimal slinging?
I mean, if not, they should. I feel like you can create that. It like calculates your wind speed and distance and like
right.
You have to weigh the rock first.
Okay. So or type in the weight.
Type in the weight of the rock. Yeah.
And it would tell you how fast you have to be swinging it. Okay.
Yeah. I like that.
Number 1.
Okay.
I like this one. Moses' GPS.
Yeah.
If Moses had access to a GPS device to help him navigate through the wilderness during the Exodus,
right,
would it have been 40 years of wandering still?
Right. Were they wandering because they were dumb, or were they wandering because God said you're going to wander?
I mean, they were wandering because God said they were going to wander, but still, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
All right. Those are the 10 things that pieces of technology that could have been used by biblical characters. Again, if you want to sponsor our ChatGPT segment,
yes,
we will read your ad. We will allow you to give us a prompt for ChatGPT that we live react to, both of us. Just email podcast@dfchurch.com. Let us know you're interested in sponsoring the ChatGPT section, and we will get you all set up. And like I said, we did not get any listener mail this week, so
that's right.
With that, we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.